Hello, students. This is a brief lecture to prepare you for the context you will need to know to do your assignment on the legacy of British imperialism in India. Before you can see if the British have had a lasting impact on Indian culture, you need to know what changes they made to India when they were in power in the 19th century. So, we're going to be talking about the period known as the Raj. The Raj is the period of British rule in India where the English government controlled vast territories in India, if not in every sense of the word, the whole thing. The British government controlled the economy, they made and enforced the laws, they tried to change the social customs, the religious practices, and the other cultural traditions of the Indian people. They firmly believed that the British way of doing things was superior and that it was their duty to make the Indians stop practicing their own culture and to start copying the British in every way. This picture sums up the British in India during this time. They lived like kings in vast palaces with Indian people serving as their servants, nannies for their children, cooking their food, fanning them with palm leaves when it got too hot, bringing their items to them, cleaning their houses. The British definitely lived at the very top of society, and the Indian people were under them and expected to do their bidding. So, we're going to start with the social impact of the Raj. The first impact I want to talk about is the language of English. English became the official language of power in India. Anyone who wanted to communicate with the British or do business in politics or um, in business had to master English to do so. And by the end of British rule, the entire educated and ruling classes of India and Pakistan both spoke English fluently. It was the language of getting things done. The next social impact I want to talk about is religious intolerance. The British were extremely intolerant of the faiths and practices of the Indian people. They made it illegal in some cases to practice Hinduism or Islam or any other non Christian religion and gave significant benefits to any Indian who converted to the British faith. Today, Indians and Pakistanis are deeply invested in protecting their right to follow their religions, sometimes at the expense of others. And that's a direct result of experiencing this religious intolerance. For example, the most famous historical event related to this, of course, is the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. The Sepoys were Indians who worked for the British. They were soldiers. They were both Hindus and Muslims. And the British at one point invented a new style of rifle, and this rifle was greased with cow and pig fat. This violated the religious practices of both sets of Indians, the Hindus and the Muslims, and so they refused to use these rifles. The British shot soldiers who refused, and the Indian people rose up against the British in order to defend their right to practice their religion. Um, they were not successful. They did not win the Sepoy Rebellion, but it does show the tensions that existed between the British and the Indian people, especially over religion. I'm going to talk about the political impact now. And the main political impact that the British had was introducing Indian people to democracy. The British exposed India to parliamentary style democracy, which is what they had at home. And while they didn't actually recreate democracy in India, nor allow Indians to have access to the same rights and privileges of British citizens, the Indian people were allowed to travel to England to study. And you can see from this picture some Indian professors and students at Oxford University in England. Um, when Indian people traveled to England to study, they became even more aware of democracy and how it was supposed to work. Another political impact is the border conflicts. When the British finally allowed India to become independent, the demand was made to make a two different countries out of that territory. A country for Hindus, which would be called India, and a country for Muslims, which would be called Pakistan. Now, when the British went to draw the map for these two new countries, they completely ignored everything they knew about the culture and religion of the regions where those lines would go. And they ended up creating a map that contributed to massive conflict that followed. And you just finished a lesson on the partition of India, so you know how bad it got at this time. But those borders and the way they were drawn have led to continual conflicts in India. And you're going to be investigating that. So, the last category I want to talk about is the economic impact. One of the largest economic impacts of this event is deindustrialization. So, when the British took over India, they didn't want Indian people with their own factories to be rivals of their factories back home in England. And so they destroyed Indian factories and they put Indian people to work creating raw materials that they could send to their own factories or sell on the open market. Um, those industrial centers, which had been quite good and controlled a significant portion of the world's industrial output, were literally torn down. And India and Pakistan were both set to growing cash crops like cotton and tea and opium. For this reason, India was not allowed to start their industrialization until World War I, which put them pretty far behind the rest of the industrial world. You can see here a destroyed factory in India and cotton production. So let's review what you're going to need to do for this assignment. First of all, we're talking about the British legacy. Now, a legacy is a long term impact of a person, group, or event. Generally, it's considered to be a gift to the future, often money. But in this case, the gift is not always positive. It's something that has a lasting impact so that you can still see its effects today. And that's what you're going to be investigating. So, the directions for this assignment are to look at the five significant impacts of the British during the Raj, which I just reviewed. And you're going to be looking for evidence that those things are still impacting India today. You have 5 documents to look at if you're doing this assignment at level 1, and 8 documents to look at if you're doing this assignment at level 2. Those documents range from charts and graphs, news articles, news reports, a photo essay. There's a lot of variety. So go ahead and take a look at those documents and see if you can figure out if these things that the British started during the Raj are still affecting India today. You're going to gather evidence that that is or is not happening, and then you're going to explain to me what your evidence is showing. That is the assignment for today. Good luck, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.